and we can do better than that. We need to also make sure that we're really focused on investing in 21st century jobs. And one thing I'm really proud of right now that's going in is we have a solar plant in Mountain Iron, diversifying the Iron Range economy, that's going to be hiring 118 people. We got that done by working across the aisle while I was in the minority. And I can do that same work out in Washington, work across the aisle when we need to, and stand up for our values when we should. Because there's nothing wrong with compromise, but we need to start prioritizing families in this country and putting workers first versus the Wall Street 1%ers and big business, which has been the status quo that Paul Ryan and the Republican Congress have fought for. And it's time for that game to be over. This district can stay blue. It will stay blue this year. People are motivated, and if they want someone who's going to get out there and fight like heck to make sure that we have the values of this district representative, they can send me out there. I've got the experience, the knowledge, and the fire in my belly to get out there and work hard on this district's behalf to fight for those things that I had just mentioned, which is, again, the Medicare for all, making sure we have the 2 free years or 2 and 4 year free college, and making sure that we are investing in the jobs that we need to so our kids can stay in the communities where they were raised and find a good job with good benefits and make their way in this world just like our grandparents and parents passed on to us. So please consider me on August 14th. I'd love to earn your vote.
Joe, you have 90 seconds for a response.
Introductions? I thought there was all 3 minutes.
I thought we were answering the possible question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
why are you the best?
Okay. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I thought there was an introduction.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. No problem. Well, my name is Joe Radinovich. I'm the 4th generation of my family to grow up on the Cuyuna Iron Range. I recognize a lot of familiar faces here tonight, and I'm thankful that you've all come out to learn more about the candidates in this race. We're very fortunate to have 5 good candidates up here offering their talents, offering their time to get out and talk to voters across this district about why this election is important. The reason this election is important to me is because I think every election is about a big idea. And my politics come from my family. My great-grandfather's a miner, my grandfather was a miner, my uncle was a miner, my dad's an electrician, brother's an electrician. But they've all heard me say this a bunch of times. Hardworking people are losing ground right now. And when I was growing up, I learned that work was about more than just a job. Work was about the way that you take care of yourself and the people you love and the dignity that comes with that. But work is changing. The example that I use is that in 1980, there were 14,500 iron miners producing 40 million tons of iron ore on the range. They still produce 40 million tons today, but it takes 4,000 iron miners. So that's 10,000 people who used to be able to walk out of high school and get a job to support themselves and their family. But that's not limited to mining. It's happening on farms, it's happening at factories, it's happening at the highway, it's happening at the grocery store, where a generation ago I would go with my grandfather and someone would scan and bag our groceries and maybe walk them out. Now you go and there's one person in a self-checkout bay doing the job that 6 or 8 people used to do, but they're not getting the wages and benefits of those 6 or 8 people who aren't there anymore. And that's the important thing to keep in mind. Our country is wealthier and more productive than it's ever been before, and it's at a time when working people are losing their ground. We have an obligation to offer a set of policies that will help working people respond, and I think that they break down into 3 categories. The first is that we need to protect retirement security. That's Social Security, Medicare, pensions. The second is we need to make investments in the people and places of this country. That's lanes and trains, it's our harbors, it's our airports, it's broadband. And it's also investments in pre-K education, post-secondary education, and in getting the healthcare system in this country right. Too many of our care dollars are being spent on things other than care, and we need to make sure that we get out there and fight to change that system. But we can't do it without addressing the third thing, which in my opinion is the broken political system that we have today. And there is no greater symptom of this broken political system than what we see here in the 8th District, where in 2016, when Congressman Nolan was running for re-election, in excess of 20 million, probably close to 30 million when you check all the sources, was spent to defeat Congressman Nolan in this district. That's money that could be used in a million other ways, and instead it's used to denigrate the fabric of democracy. It never brings anybody up, it's used to tear somebody down, and it makes it a lot tougher for people to govern once they get to Washington, D.C. The stakes are very clear in this election. We have an administration that has no regard, I think, for the truth or for the interests of the people in this room. The first step is to take back this Congress, and we have to do that by keeping this seat blue. I think I can do that, and I look forward to answering the rest of the questions tonight. Thank you.
Michelle, you have 3 minutes.
Pardon me?
You have 3 minutes.
Bonjour, everybody. Good evening. My name is Michelle Lee, and My secret weapon is I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician looking for a career to go to Washington. I'm not a career politician. What I want to do is go to Washington and conduct the people's business. Now, some of you may not know who I am, but I spent almost 35 years on television in Duluth covering stories throughout the northern part of this district. And when I say covering the stories as a journalist, I got out, I talked to people, but more importantly, I listened. The night that Donald Trump was elected our president, I was on the anchor set. And when one of our experts, one of our political analysts, leaned over during a commercial break and told me that Donald Trump would become our next president, it was like a kick in the gut. I was almost speechless. As an anchor, that's pretty bad, because we like to talk. But I knew then that my greatest fear was, because we had all watched him through the campaign and the things he was saying and the nasty things he was saying and the divisive things that he was saying to split this country, that this was going to be a continuum, that we were in for quite a ride. And we certainly have been hanging on by our fingertips over the last year and a half as he has set out to change what we all love and respect about our country. I knew that at the end, when I walked away from the anchor desk at the end of 2016, that number one, my husband and I could just retire peacefully. I could enjoy time in my flower garden when it finally hit spring here in Minnesota. We might be able to travel this country. But I knew that I could not do that. I could not sit down like many, many good people in this country. We are standing up and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. And people say, well, Michelle, you are a single issue candidate. Someone told me tonight that I was a tree hugger. And I'm so much more than that. Yes, I am concerned about the future of our children and our grandchildren, our air and our water. These are basic human rights. But we also have to focus on the issues that we can agree on, the issues that we agree on, that right now we have a whole generation of young people that is too big to fail. These are the young kids coming out of college. They are saddled with heavy student debt. They're going to carry those chains of debt throughout their lives. We, as good Democrats, we know how to solve these things. I've got 30 seconds, but I can still talk a lot in those 30 seconds. Health care for all. On the way here tonight, we stopped at a local bar to have a hamburger. The waitress bartender, she's 5 weeks pregnant. She's got 2 kids at home. She's making a minimum wage job, and she said that she and her husband are holding out hope that they can get on MinCare. Her last pregnancy, she worked 12 hours a day on her feet during that pregnancy. Is this the country that we know, love, and respect? Is this the future that we want for this young woman, this young working mom, and our children and our grandchildren? I say no.
Kirsten.
And I can beat Pete Stauber.
So the original question is this is a toss-up district. How will I, as a candidate, as a leader, be able to cross over to non-voters, Republicans, and independents? So I'll quickly tell you a little bit about myself and then answer the question. My name is Kirsten Hagen Kennedy. I have to say the Hagen part because I am a Norwegian-born American, a daughter of a Norwegian immigrant. I know that President Trump says he would like a lot more of us to come here from Norway. My family in Norway, I cannot say the word they use, but they're not interested. I am a single mom of 5 great kids. I am the first person in my family to go to college. And I want you to know I only went to college at 45 after my husband and I separated serving active duty in Italy. I was in active duty in my family of origin and active duty in my marriage. While my marriage did not survive, it forced me to go to college so I could support my kids. I started at 45. I graduated at 52 with a master's in advocacy and political leadership. I did not grow up thinking I wanted to go into politics. I loved being a mom. I loved being in my community and doing things with my family. Sometimes things don't work out. We all have had loss. We have all had failure. It's not what you do during those times. It's your next step you do. So I saved my police department in my community. And then I went on to try to save our senior center. And then I decided to run for office. not because I thought being an elected official was the best thing in the world, but because I could not stand the corruption. When I watched the President of the United States stand next to Vladimir Putin, I knew in that moment that we had done a disservice to our country, that we were with an enemy of the United States of America. And my dad was 2 when the Nazis invaded Oslo and 8 when they left. We can never forget. Right now in Congress, less than 5% of bills have been considered an open rule, which means we don't get to debate, we don't get to see what's going on. Before 2011, it was 90% of bills. Here's what I do. I'll do exactly what I did in my community. First time progressive woman, I won by 62% of the vote. Re-election, 59% of the vote. I had to have independents, Republicans, and non-political people vote for me. And how I did that was by building relationships and showing that I was a strong leader responsible for a city's budget, and making sure the toilets flushed where they were supposed to go, and making sure when something went wrong, I was there. I worked 365 days, and I am over.
Soren.
Hello, I'm Soren Sorensen. I'm from the Bemidji and Black Duck area, so just on the northwestern edges of our district. And the reason that I believe that I'm the best candidate in this race is that I've got significant campaign experience and experience within the party, but I've also built multi-partisan coalitions that have helped elect statewide candidates like Mark Ritchie, working with folks in other parties to make sure that we all get our wins where we need them, right? So, so I believe that I might be the only candidate that can blunt the impact of a third-party candidate running on strong environmental issues and a long history of working closely with Native Americans on their issues. And I've already been knocking on thousands of doors across the district, right? And I've been knocking every door, which means that I've been meeting people from other parties of no party affiliation, new voters. And I've been winning over some conservatives along the way. Within the party, I've been building the party's capacity to win elections by building a truly mass party, by empowering our precinct chairs, by making people who are caucusing realize that when they are running for those positions, those low-level party office positions, that they've got a responsibility to stay put in that precinct, to knock doors, and that's really kind of fun. In the end, the way that we're going to survive the economic catastrophes that we're facing with climate change and with Trump's wild trade wars is getting to know our neighbors and getting to know their needs and their capacities for us all to come together in the way that many of our ancestors did. You know, not too many generations ago, before a rural electrification act made a difference on our landscape, we had to gather together in the last building with a large wood pile outside of it on cold winter nights. We raised each other's barns, you know, so I think that we've got a capacity to work together again and to still respect our country's democratic traditions. So I'm really looking forward to this campaign. I'm looking forward to doing really well in the primary without a ton of money, without having to have cozied up with 1% donors and Wall Street. And I'd really like to have your support on the doors and your small contributions at the end of this, because in the end, that's the only way that we can win. My campaign is really about fundamental human rights issues, and I believe that those bridge gaps between our parties, that most Americans believe in the First Amendment and freedom of expression. We believe in freedom of movement. We've enjoyed that over our nation's highway systems. I believe in access to nutritious food and clean water. Access to health care is a human right. Equal rights for women, girls, and LGBTQA folks, and respecting tribal sovereignty. These are fundamental human rights, and our American traditions are deeply rooted in our foundational documents like the Constitution and this First Amendment bit. And one of the things that I've been enjoying knocking on doors is having people initially like, why are you in here? This is a secure building. You can't knock on our doors. And I'm like, you've got a right to hear from each of us, right? That's why we have a right to enter your multiple unit dwellings and knock on every door and meet every voter, because you have a right to hear from each of us. And unfortunately, that hasn't been happening with the corporate media. And I'd ask you to raise that issue if it happens again. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to start with our round questions where one candidate will answer the question followed by shorter responses. And I believe you start with Jason at the, okay. Jason, 10 years ago, our nation's financial crisis was addressed by a bipartisan compromise which bailed out some institutions while Congress passed tougher regulations on investment banking. Now, several of those regulations are being eliminated. Should the federal government bail out Wall Street if another financial crisis occurs? Why or why not, and what safeguards would you put in place to assure our economy is not at risk?
I think that the economy should be fair. Like I said in my opening statements, fairness really drives me. And we've got an economy that really set up itself to have Wall Street bailed out and for big businesses to thrive. And we need to start holding those people accountable. I think one of the things that we can all be upset with is that while CEOs have, since 1978, seen a 937% increase in their pay, middle-class families are barely getting by at the rate of inflation with their wage increases. That's backwards. The middle class built this country. We need to get back to our roots and make sure that we're investing back in them. And that means holding Wall Street accountable, making sure that we're passing workplace protections, and I would support the small transaction tax on speculative trading out there to make sure that we can fund other critical programs that affect our community and put dollars and resources back into the people who make this country work, which are you, your friends, your neighbors, your family, so that we can get back to focusing on what really matters, and that's looking out for one another. So if we can take some measures to make sure that we're holding those big businesses accountable out in Wall Street, then we'll have a lot better chance of making sure that all of us in this room and, again, our friends and neighbors get a better shake in life so that we can focus on getting a good job after going to college that's affordable and making sure that we aren't worried about paying that next medical bill and not going in for the care that we need in order to get that insurance coverage, because people in this country deserve a fair shake, and right now it's been backwards and we need to crack down on it. I would get out there and work really hard on making sure that these companies are treating you fairly and get this country back on track so that we're focused on the middle class again.
Joe, you have a 90-second response?
A lot of people in this country, when you talk about programs like healthcare or childcare or post-secondary education, they talk about socialism. That's socialism. We can't have that in this country. Well, we already have a form of socialism in this country, and it's for the capitalists on Wall Street, where we socialize all of their risks and they get all of the rewards. That's how that system works. And so, you know, Jason did a good job, I think, of talking about some of the statistics. Back in the 1970s, up until that point in the American history, the rate of productivity, as productivity increased in our country, so too did wages. But those two things decoupled in the 1970s. And while productivity skyrocketed, wages stayed stagnant. The problem that we have, I think, as a country is how we figure out a way forward. I know the way forward isn't by attacking laws like Glass-Steagall, which separated the traditional banking side and the investment side of big banks, or by attacking Dodd-Frank, which was implemented in, I think, 2010 to reform the big banks after the crisis. That's not the way forward. We can't undo the laws that helped us in the first place and make our country richer. The other thing that we need to do is go on the offense. We know that people work to provide for their family, but too many people can't afford health care. We've got spaghetti fundraisers in our communities to make sure that people can pay their medical bills. We've got kids who are going to daycare at their family members or friends' houses instead of high-quality programs. The way out of this is through investment in the people and ensuring that if we're going to socialize risk, it's for everybody across the society. We recognize that we are intertwined and that we are stronger together, and that's the way forward for us.
Michelle.
Well, the Wall Street crash happened, 10 years ago? And they say those who forget history is doomed to repeat it. And it's really frustrating because I bet you many people in this room, your investments, your retirements are tied to whether the Wall Street, whether the Dow goes up or down every day. And that's out of our control, sadly. But rules and regulations that were put into place after we saved all of these big companies that were too big to fail should remain. They should be tightened because That's our money. That's our investments. That is our future and our children's future. And boy, I'll tell you what, we have been going through, for many years, capitalism and democracy has had an uneasy peace. They've always been balanced. But what I'm seeing is capitalism is winning over democracy. And we as people have to get involved, have to speak up, have to stand up, and have to tell our elected officials that they have to stand up for the little guy, the working poor, the middle class. We're seeing the middle class shrinking. We're seeing walls being built around the working poor. And who is benefiting? The 1%ers. And that's where rules, regulations, they need to be stronger, and they need to be built and pursued to protect the little guy, the little woman, and the families.
Kirsten.
Well, thank you everyone for being so kind. I'd like to see some people go to jail because frankly, I'm just going to be honest. If corporations are people and they steal or they're grifters or they break the law, people go to jail. People go to jail for marijuana. Some people are serving life sentences. We voted for this. We allowed it to happen. It's our responsibility as citizens to vote for leaders that will go and change things. It's difficult to change things when you get a lot of your money from corporations or lobbyists that have so much money in the game that they will make sure corporations and Wall Street never serve a day in jail. Keep getting their good deal. As we see, I would argue, there is no middle class. We have the 1%, and then we have the working poor. So we need to first admit we have a problem before we can change it. So let's not only strengthen banking laws, how about if we overturn Citizens United? How about a corporation is not a person? So while we can all talk about regulations, it takes steps and it will take courage and bold progressiveness to move us past this.
Soren.
I remember when Lehman Brothers failed and we were in, I think, the last stages of the Obama campaign. And I remember a lot of the people in that Obama office in St. Paul really pretty worried. And I was kind of young and angry, and I was like, let them fail, you know, and I proudly wore my Kucinich t-shirt around the office for a couple of days. And honestly, I think I've got a much more mature perspective on it now. But I remember following closely the passage of TARP 1 and TARP 2. I remember the proposals for Obama's stimulus. And I remember the work of a couple of economists, Romer and Bernstein, who calculated that the greatest return on spending for stimulus would be in increasing SNAP, increasing food stamps. And the math shows that that worked. It worked so well that we should build that in, an automatic increase into food stamps as law, so it can't be held captive to partisan politics in a moment of crisis. Wall Street should pay its fair share. So we've talked about paying for some of our social programs as the National Nurses Union does with the Robin Hood tax, a financial transaction tax of about 0.5% on a lot of their highly speculative, very rapid, often automated trades that can go really wrong and spiral out of control when markets are unstable as they are now, right? One of the ways that we can also build resilience into our economic system within our district is we can create regional equity markets. Here in Minnesota, we finally created something called Minvest, and it's equity crowdfunding, and hopefully we'll get into it.
Thank you. The next question goes to Joe with responses from... Oh, he gets one. I'm sorry. Jason, and if you want to rebut any of their comments. Okay. Now we can go to Joe. The next question. By a 5-4 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court recently ruled that government workers who choose not to join unions may not be required to help pay for collective bargaining. What impact do you believe this will have on unions, and what changes to current laws, if any, would you recommend to support workers?
That's a great question, and I'll just note that with 5 Democrats on stage, there seems to be a lot less need for rebut, so we can keep things moving along pretty well. But You know, that was a devastating blow. Janus, the decision in front of the Supreme Court, was one more step to erode the ability of unions to organize in this country. That's something that's very important to me. I grew up in a very strong union household. I was born in 1986. That was 6 years into the Reagan administration, and for the first 10 years of my life, I thought Reagan's middle name was a swear word. And so I remember hearing for a long time about him breaking PATCO, and I had no clue what PATCO was, but I knew it was bad. So I was a public employee organizer, and what I recognize unions do is they build power on the job. They put workers in the driver's seat, and it's not just about pay and benefits. It's about safety. It's about dignity. It's about the things that you can control to make your work life better. Everybody has to work in this society to pay for the things that they need as a family, and we need to make sure that they're not in a position where they are powerless on the job. And so some of the things I think that we can do to help workers reclaim some of this power is to make sure that we pass pro-worker legislation out in Washington, D.C. Several years ago, it was referred to as the Employee Free Choice Act, which would allow unions to certify after a majority had signed a card saying that they wanted to. It would take away employers' ability to stall out negotiations and force arbitration. This is something that we can do that's really important. But one other thing I think we can do is talk about the value of unions. Just because Janus was passed doesn't mean that those unions are going away. It makes their job more difficult, but what if we recognize that our job as union members or as union supporters isn't defined by the U.S. Congress, but instead by our own actions? People can still sign up willingly. They can find a lot more power and solidarity in the voluntary recognition than they otherwise maybe in places where they just were automatically enrolled. So what I'm hoping this represents is a renaissance in the union movement in this country, that we fight back, and we fight back harder than we ever have, because the future depends on it. Our middle class was a lot stronger when we had a lot higher union membership in this country, and you can count on me to be an ally for union workers and for their organizations across this country.
Michelle, your response?
I agree. Unions essentially built this state. When you look at the Iron Range, you look in the Twin Cities, unions are essential. My mom, 92 years old, she's benefiting now from a 49ers pension. That's many years that she has enjoyed health care and a sense of well-being as a result of union involvement. My son is a union member. He works at Whole Foods Co-op in Duluth. They just unionized. I'm very proud that he helped work that out and that that little store is now unionized. My daughter-in-law is a registered nurse. She is also a union member. When we talk about the decision, U.S. Supreme Court decision, Janus versus AFSCME, that is just part of the slow chipping away of union power. That scares me. I look to the east, to Wisconsin, a right-to-work state, and have seen what has happened in Wisconsin and many other states, and it's like a house of cards, and it's coming to us. Let me say, number one, right to work is wrong for Minnesota. I will be an ally for unions because I know that unions have given us that 40-hour week. It has given us our weekends off. It has given us a safe work environment. Without unions, I'll tell you what, there's power in numbers, and unions can be powerful, but we have also seen a falling away where we have a whole generation of young people who don't understand what unions can do for them. They want the money in their pocket now rather than being taken out of their checkbook. We need to educate young people about the power and the value of unions. Thank you.
Kirsten.
I believe the decision actually will help us strengthen unions, and I have never been part of a union. I do not have any family member. I have a couple of teachers, one who teaches in a right-to-work state, my oldest daughter. My other sister, who just retired, taught in Southern California for her entire career, and she was part of a union. What I would say is that workers' rights are human rights, and as a mayor of a city who, when I was an organizer, they came in every day and thought they were going to be fired, I said, join a union. I still would say that today. What it has spurred for me is trying hard to work to get people to organize. I have stalkers in my local grocery store, and I talk to them about it. And they say, we're afraid because we want to, but then they kind of scare us a little bit. It's about empowering people, and that's what unions do. And I think that if we go to Washington and we put forth legislation that actually supports the values that unions stand for, we will be supporting the values of the Democratic Party. So I say unions are right. We can't go back and change this decision. What we can do is make sure that the judges appointed to the highest courts believe in people.
Soren.
Well, the judicial attack on organized labor has been going on for a long time, and it's had an impact. Again, I'm from the Bemidji area. A lot of young people working in our area can't find good jobs. It's not evident how you might go about starting a union. We see too many local party leaders who identify with the Democratic Party making decisions for their municipalities to outsource the administration of like the local hockey arena to a company in Iowa so that they don't have to pay people to work directly for the city and be represented by a union, and that's despicable. And it's frustrating to see people like Rita Albright make those kinds of decisions because of pocketbook issues for the city. So I don't know how you go about starting a union. I haven't had that experience, but I have had the experience of operating in solidarity with workers who have grievances. You know, I was a part of Occupy. I had a lot of fun going out to the West Coast and working with Teamsters and non-union folks who are working in terrible conditions in the truck ports and to democratize our nation's investment in public ports infrastructure. So I think that we need to find ways to empower people to fight against great wealth, whether or not there is a union. And our greatest tools are really the First Amendment, freedom of speech, occupying public spaces, and how we spend our own money. So we need to go after the Kochs. We need to think about boycotting their products. We need to figure out who's behind these attacks and make their pocketbooks pay, and to take the fight to the streets again. You know.
Jason.
I've been a union organizer for the last 7 years. I'm a UFCW member, and one of the things I've really learned is we all do better when we all do better. We need to make sure that something like collective bargaining gets stronger, not weaker in Washington. Collective bargaining brought us health care from Minnesota's own Steelworkers Union back in the late 50s and early 60s. They fought like heck to get that into a contract, and now everyone has the benefit of having a health care plan provided by their employer. We need to make sure that we continue that hard work because they fought for workplace safety to make sure that people could go to work and not be getting hurt on the job, and having the tools in place to make sure that their employers were being more responsible with their lives and their livelihoods. And that's why we need to make collective bargaining the law of the land. When our country's middle class was strongest, union membership was at its highest percentage. More people were doing great things by spending their paychecks in the community and helping out their brothers and sisters in labor, and we can get back to that again. We need to expand that opportunity for the next generation of workers so we don't leave them behind now. And I will not rest in Washington until we pass laws that allow people to make life better for themselves, their families, and working families across this district.
Joe, would you like to offer a rebuttal to any of the responses?
Seconds, if you will. As a former union organizer and as one of the two candidates who are endorsed by unions in this race, one of the things I think has been missing in this conversation so far is that this attack on working people, this attack on unions, really is at some level about campaign finance, right? Unions are one of the great counterbalances in our electoral politics to the corrupting influence of corporate money in our political world. And so I just want to mention that I'm very proud that tomorrow we're going to be announcing the endorsement of an organization that's been fighting against that corrupting influence of money in our political world. We're going to be celebrating the endorsement of End Citizens United. So I'm very proud of that. I'm not afraid that that's going to be in the paper tomorrow. It's going to be tomorrow's edition, right? So we'll be on sync with everything. Yeah, all right, Wednesday's edition. Very good. I didn't spoil the secret, so.
The next question goes to Michelle. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that between 2013 and 2016, net farm income fell by half. The largest three-drop three-year drop since the Great Depression. Some 42,000 farms folded during the downturn, most of which were small and medium-sized operations. Now, with commodity prices still low, increasing foreign tariffs, and farm debt predicted to reach record highs, the nonprofit organization Farm Aid has warned that the country will see its highest rate of farm closures since the 1980s. What programs would you propose to help farmers not just survive but thrive?
Well, I'll tell you what, as a young journalist back in the 1980s, I remembered the Farm Aid concerts, and I did a multiple string of stories in Carleton County with dairy farmers and talked with farmer after farmer and the struggle that they were under. And Carleton County used to be the shining light of dairy farms throughout northeastern Minnesota, and we had creameries. The farms supported families, and they could afford to send their kids to college, and they milked their cows, and they were able to pass those farms on to their children. Not so much anymore. That shining light now only has 7 family dairy farms left in Carleton County. And I'll tell you what, it seems like every week they're hit with a new cost, a new expense, and new problems. Right now, Carleton County, they are shipping their milk. AMPI is not working, not organized anymore in Duluth, Minnesota. So they can't ship their milk from Carleton County up to Duluth. They have to hire a tanker to pick up their milk, and their transportation costs have gone up by $250 a month. Now, you might think that's not a lot of money, but if you're a struggling family farmer making the decision, can I hold on to my herd 1 year more year, that $250 a month is a big deal. I think we have to reach out. We have to expand the Farm Bill to ensure the security and strength of our family farms. You know, right now they're being faced with a big decision: get big or get out. Well, you know, a lot of people don't want to run a 400 head cattle operation for milking. They like their little family farms of 100, 150 cows. Mom has to work out, drive a bus to help support and supplement the income of a farm. I think that's wrong. We also are seeing a lot of young people wanting to come into agriculture, whether it's organic farming, to increase the farm to table renaissance that we are seeing, at least in the northeastern part of the district, and I assume and hopefully it's happening down this way too. I have to do my homework down this way as far as the farming. The tariffs right now, as far as helping
Kirsten, your response?
We have 5 of the 10 poorest counties in Minnesota in our district. We have one of the highest death by suicide on our family farms. I am the daughter of a long line of Norwegian farmers. As you know, Norway does not grow things very easily. And frankly, a lot of my ancestors on my grandma's side from Sweden came to the United States because they couldn't get food to eat. I would argue that instead of trade wars, we have strong trade policy. Instead of harming our small farms, we actually give incentives and help to our small farmers so that we can grow food in our district, we can eat healthy food, we can have healthier communities, and we can bring down costs. We're going to either do it on the front end or the back end. And I would argue that farming is something that America is known for, and you should not have to be a corporate farm to be able to make it. And we need to put our money where our mouth is. And I always say our budgets reflect our values. We need a stronger farm bill. The farm bill used to be so strong, that's why SNAP is attached to it, because they thought it wouldn't be harmed. They thought we could protect some of our most vulnerable citizens because we used to be so strong. We can do that again. It takes political will, and it takes people willing to go to Washington and do the work for the farmers who don't have a ton of money for lobbyists.
Soren?
Could I hear the question again?
I'll shorten it but since between 2013 and 2016, net farm income fell by half. 42,000 farms folded during the downturn. with commodity prices still low, increasing foreign tariffs, and farm debt predicted to reach record highs, people are warning that there'll be a highest rate of farm closures in years. What do you propose to do to help farmers survive, but not just survive, but thrive in this economy?
Well, we need to make sure that our farmers are growing food for people in our own communities wherever possible. I think that's one of the things that will make our district more resilient, and it's definitely hard on our landscape. So we've seen investments really pay off in appropriate technology for our environment. So high tunnel hoop houses have been a great asset for folks that are growing food for our farmers markets. We need to make sure that there's strong support, especially in these very poor counties, for people to be able to use SNAP, their EBT cards, at farmers markets. But we need to investigate opportunities to reduce the cost of being a farmer. I spent the day today with the Minnesota Farmers Union in Royalton, which is actually in our district, looking at how on-farm production of clean green energy is reducing cost and making farming more sustainable. We need to make sure that a lot of the small programs that are designed to increase conservation on the farm actually pay for themselves, right? Too many farmers tell me, and too many folks working for NRCS have told me when I've been a farmer that most folks don't think these programs are really legit. They're not worth the drive to town. And the really great example of one that works is high tunnels. But we need to make sure that we're really fighting Sonny Perdue and his radical proposal to ship commodity boxes. I mean, that is a Stalinist-Leninist solution. Food stamps is a free market solution where people with specific nutritional requirements can find the food that they want. It puts cashiers and small town groceries to work, truckers bringing food to our markets to work. So the attack on SNAP, the attack on the Farm Bill, we need to fight that with courage. It'll be fun.
And Jason.
Farmers in this region are a critical part of our economy, and we need to protect and support their work. We need to pass a farm bill, first of all, to help farmers too. My family got its start in agriculture. My great-great-grandfather was a homesteader up in Angora and worked his way on the land and gave us the opportunity that we had to get out and experience the kind of life that I am now sitting on this stage in front of you. Family farms are competing in a global economy, and we need to make sure that instead of those family farms working even harder and having more difficult laws in place to put up roadblocks for them, that we're making it easier for them to compete by rewarding sustainable agricultural practices and establishing more USDA certified processing plants throughout the region so that those same farmers can get their product to a local market and have a farm-to-table solution for our communities and make sure that they aren't burdened with shipping their product from, say, up in my neck of the woods all the way down to Cannon Falls to get a stamp to sell it at the local grocery store. These are things we could do for a fairly small investment that would enable them to succeed and thrive in this region. Minnesota's farmers also deserve a level playing field because they're competing against global markets and our big corporate farms. And they need a fighter in Washington to look out for their interests, and I'll be that fighter for them.
Joe.
There's over 10,000 farms here in the 8th Congressional District, and over 90% of them are family-owned, like the one that my grandparents had in Long Lake Township out here. They raised cattle. It's also where I found out I don't have much interest in riding horses, but that's a different story for a different time. I would echo a lot of the comments that have been said up here. We need a farm bill. We need a farm bill that recognizes that farmers need to make money from their products, that we have a system that isn't working right now. I was at a farmers union event up in Carlton County with my friend Jason here, and we had a dairy farmer up there tell us that recently the USDA was sending out pamphlets about how to avoid depression and suicide. That's not a substitute for an adequate farm bill and for real farm prices that support the ability to earn a living. I want to hone in on a couple things here. Somebody mentioned the connection between the food support or SNAP side of the farm bill and the agricultural part. And my understanding of how that came to be was because they recognized that urban members of the Congress would be interested in ensuring that there's nutritional assistance available to the wide, swaths of population in their areas, and that the rural members were interested in passing, agricultural supports, and that they were worried that if it were limited to one or the other, that the other side may not see the interest. And that's why we've had such broad bipartisan support in the Farm Bill. And that's an important thing to keep in mind because it transitions to when we talk about tariffs. We cannot see an increase in growth in the middle class if we are pitting one class of working people against another's. If we're going to pit the miners on the Iron Range against the farmers in the southern part of this district, that's just a trick to keep us all in the blind. That's what that is. And so when it comes to tariffs, I think that we need to have a very targeted approach. I would point to the Obama administration's actions when it came to the iron mines in 2015 and 2016. Because they ran it through the trade courts and put additional support and focus there, we saw tariffs in excess of 500% on individual steel products, which is the way to do it, not a blanket approach where we put 25% or 10% on everything, including that which is coming from our allies who are not cheating and who are undercutting American workers. So that's what we need to do. I think that's the way forward.
Michelle, would you like to rebut any of the responses? Okay. The next question goes to Kirsten. This past year, the White House has established tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, which are seen as an economic boon to the mining industry in the 8th Congressional District. However, China's retaliatory tariff on soybeans is seen as a devastating blow to the farming industry in our district. There are other retaliatory tariffs from China, Canada, Mexico, and many European countries that have escalated the trade war and threaten to be a heavy blow to all of Minnesota. As a member of Congress, how would you balance the needs of all your constituents in the complex array of the global marketplace?
I would once again talk about, I always say if war is the answer, we're asking the wrong questions. A trade war is a war nevertheless. We're just not using weapons. We're using food or commodities to hurt either another country, but most of all, the people that live in those countries, the people that do that work. I would argue that we need more working together. We need to keep our relationships with our allies strong. We need to take care of the cheaters. Absolutely. Let's deal with the cheaters. But we cannot tank one group of people or say, oh, great, we're going to do something really nice for our miners, but farmers, sorry, we're throwing you out the door. That's not how it works, and that's not leadership. That, I would argue, is probably really good lobbying. Who has the most money to give you and will take care of your products? So I would say that when you talk to people, find out who they are as a leader. Do they build coalitions? Do they believe in listening? Do they believe in having a broad view of the world, not just where they live, or a 10-mile or a 50-mile or a 27,000 plus square mile radius? Because I believe, and I've said this before, I think we're all here tonight as leaders. And what kind of leaders you decide to be or who you are shows in the decisions you make, the things that are important to you, and what you value. And I value a country where everyone gets a fair shake.
Soren.
It is definitely true that much of the world has not been respecting America's intellectual property, and that some of our trade deals have been really counterproductive in the past. If we are concerned about immigration at our southern border, one of the root causes is dumping commodity grains on Mexico and Latin America. And we've ended up with a pretty imbalanced agricultural economy, in part because of the success of lobbyists who are financed with the soybean and corn checkoffs. And I really do think that we, especially with growing climate instability, instability in trade across international borders, we need to focus on kind of restoring our capacity to do what we can with what we have where we are. I mean, that was kind of the maxim that most Americans got through the Great Depression with. And, clearly, no one knows what's going to happen with Trump and his trade wars and the kind of instability that he's adding to a world that's already destabilized because of the economic crisis in Greece and now Italy. I've spent time in Southeast Asia working with farmers who grow crops that we can't grow, working with rubber farmers, working with people who grow coffee. And I know that we grow crops here in Minnesota that they can't grow. In the end, they're going to need our wheat for their noodles, and we're going to need their coffee. I mean, I need coffee. You need coffee. We're going to find a way to get a cup of coffee, regardless of what Trump does. So I think that the potential to recover from the fiasco today would be strengthened if I'm in Congress, in part because of my experience working with farmers in other countries, working within the UN framework, and
Jason.
We need to ensure that American workers are on a level playing field with everyone else, whether you're on the mines up on the range, the farms in the southern and western parts of this district, or manufacturing something somewhere else, or just a plain old consumer who's at a regular day job. We need fairness. Our workers will compete with everyone on the planet because Minnesota has some of the hardest workers in the country, which means we have some of the hardest workers in the world. And I've sat down and seen firsthand the damage that unfair trade has really done. Hundreds of families during the last economic downturn up on the Iron Range came in, we sat down together, filled out that paperwork for the unemployment benefits that they deserved and for the health care that they couldn't afford because they lost their job through no fault of their own. And all those families wanted was their government to be there when they needed them most. And that's what I focused on. And it's what our politics should be focused on, is being there for people when their government needs them most. Our policies should reflect our values, and our trade should be fair. Our workers deserve it, and I'll fight to make sure that it is.
Joe.
I got into the tariffs a little bit ago, and a good example of what's happened over the last several years in this country are that in the 2015 and 2016 years, we had specific steel products that were being dumped by countries like China and Korea on our shores, and those products were being manipulated and subsidized over there on those foreign shores, and then they were displacing American workers here in the North American market. And so when Dennis McDonough was brought to the Iron Range, the Obama administration focused in very closely, and they were able to apply, as I mentioned, tariffs in excess of 500% or 200% on very specific steel products. That put people back to work here, and it had nothing to do with Donald Trump. Don't forget that, and don't let anybody else forget that either. But when we apply tariffs of 25% or 10% across the board, including on our allies like Canada, what happens is that iron ore that's made on the range, about 40 million tons of it, 1/3 of it goes right over to Canada to be turned into steel. And then it comes generally right back across the border in the form of steel to help us build our buildings, our highways, all the things that we need to live. So these trade wars are not helping us one bit. What we need to do is apply a scalpel where we can. I don't want to go too much further with that analogy, unless I draw the ire of a colleague here. But we want to be very specific about that. And the other thing is that we want to make sure that we're not pitting farmers against miners. The start of this is making sure that we have fair trade deals from the onset. Too often when we've achieved these trade deals with other countries, we haven't had regard for the environmental standards or the labor standards in practice there. And we know that when those countries are able to avoid those rules and avoid the same regulations we have in this country, it gives them an advantage, and it gives them an advantage in trade. So we cannot allow that to continue to happen. And as a congressperson, the role that I would have in Washington, D.C. is to advocate on behalf of the American worker. I'll be happy to do that.
Michelle.
Well, I have to say that the mess we're in, I will blame Donald Trump. He starts a trade war by tweet without deliberate planning and thought to those who will lose their jobs and their livelihoods as a result of his blanket tariffs. And I will use the analogy. You cannot use a sledgehammer when it comes to laying out tariffs when a scalpel will do. We do not want to kill the patient we're trying to save. During the Obama administration, he did apply tariffs to prevent the dumping of cheap foreign steel, and the Iron Range benefited as a result. when you are very careful and methodical, you're not going to have the blowback where you have the soybean farmers that are really feeling the pinch right now and determining whether they should buy a tractor or will they be able to buy a new piece of equipment down the line, or the pork farmer that is now struggling to make ends meet. And just go down the line. Harley Davidson considering moving part of its manufacturing to a foreign country, or the nail manufacturer that had to close. We have to be very careful, and we can't alienate our good allies to the north and the south. So I will blame Donald Trump. Absolutely. We need common sense leaders to go to Washington and speak truth to power and consider what these blanket statements that our president is doing and what the impact is he's having here back at home. And I'm all for making sure that our Iron Rangers have a lot of work and that the taconite and the iron ore industry is humming along and wonderful. But I also am concerned about our farmers and our technology industries that are suffering as a result of the blowback of these big tariffs that he has laid down on aluminum and iron ore.
Kirsten, would you like to offer a rebuttal to any of the comments? Okay. Then the next question goes to Soren. According to the Center for Disease Control, there were more than 63,600 drug overdoses in the United States in 2016, up 21% over 2015 and more than 3 times the rate in 1999. That's approximately 175 deaths per day. How would you deal with this growing crisis?
I think it's really interesting that the CDC is able to track that so closely when they're obviously fighting a very powerful lobby. And the CDC is prevented from looking at one of our other big epidemics, which is the problem of gun violence in our communities. And we need to repeal the Dickey Amendment to make sure that the CDC can track that, which is another major source of mortality, especially in rural America, when you factor in farmer suicides and the rest. So I suffer from chronic pain. I mean, I honestly can't really walk for like the first hour of the day until my meds kick in. It took a really, really long time to get to a pain clinic that could even begin to treat that. It is very frustrating that that's a concern and that the tools that we have for dealing with chronic pain are so very limited, right? To the extent that medicinal uses of cannabinoids work, then I imagine those folks with that need should be able to go there. So we need to also permit research. So we're going to have to revisit Schedule I drugs and what that really means with opioid drugs. So, but it is problematic, and we have a lot of people who are really desperately trying to escape society. And many of us who can afford it with our our great rural broadband, we can escape into a world of Netflix and Westworld. But for other people, opioids are cheaper, and that's a real problem.
Jason?
We need more accountability. Businesses and Wall Street 1%ers shouldn't be benefiting from people who are in pain, suffering, and going through some of the things that just happen in life. We need to be looking out for them as politicians and making sure that the people who are receiving the care are the priority. And right now, we have a system that's been built to allow people like the pharma boy who's been in the news jacking up insulin prices and making them unaffordable. We've got EpiPens, which have skyrocketed in America, but you can go right across the border in Canada and find an affordable option for your family that might be worth a taxi ride or a bus trip or a family trip up there. So accountability is where we start with this. We have allowed these companies over time to spend more and more money lobbying for things, and I think that it's time to put an end to that and make sure that we are looking out at putting a penny a pill tax on all the opioids out there. I had a friend who broke his back in high school in a car accident, got addicted to opioids. And instead of watching his kids grow up, he spent part of his life and their lives in jail because he made some poor decisions when he should have gotten treatment. And I think that it reverts down to a real big need for us to get real about healthcare as well. So that's why in my Northern New Deal platform, we're supporting a Medicare for all, and the mental, physical, and other healthcare needs that you have should be covered under one umbrella so you can go seek the care that you need and focus on the important things in life.
Thank you. Joe?
In my travels, we met with Lutheran Social Services in Duluth. They described an entire generation of lost parents, lost to the opioid epidemic. In my work in Minneapolis, in Little Earth, there are children as young as 10 years old being trafficked on the street in exchange for drugs, and a group like Natives Against Heroin out there fighting against that. I have, in my own personal life, have had friends who have lost their lives to opioid overdoses. And so we know what the problem is, and we also know what the solution is. It's wraparound services, it's access to health care, it's models that work like the one they're using at St. Gabriel's in Little Falls. However, here's the other problem. The opioid or the pharma lobby has a lot of power, and as an example of that, my friend Jason mentioned the penny a pill legislation that was being proposed in St. Paul. Okay, that's really good legislation. It's going to charge 1 penny per pill. It's going to set that aside so that there's a fund to deal with this crisis. We know it's important. So what happened? Had broad bipartisan support. It was introduced by a Republican author, Dave Baker, originally from Aiken, now from Wilmer. He lost a son to the opioid epidemic. He was deeply invested in this solution. So what happens? Big Pharma deploys 36 lobbyists to the state capitol. That's more lobbyists than there are senators in the majority party. What do? They kill the legislation. They took your seat at the table. That's what special interests do in our society. And you know the worst part about this whole thing? The worst part is that when you went to pick up the drugs you needed to live or that your family member needed, you paid for those lobbyists. That's our broken healthcare system and that's our broken political system, and both of them are attacking us right now.
Michelle?
Well, big pharma is a big problem, and they aren't afraid to tell big lies. They told our doctors when they first introduced opioids, this is a miracle drug. You can take it, nobody's going to get addicted, and guess what? We have generations of people now addicted because people get hurt on the job, they are struggling with cancer and other illnesses, and pain management is something that we really have to focus on. It's real, pain is real, we have to take care of it. But we have to start thinking what the lies that Big Pharma told us and the impact now. We have people that are dying as a result of their addictions. But I also know people who are crippled with arthritis, and opioids help them, and they manage the use of those pills very carefully. They follow their prescriptions. So we have to find a happy medium here. During my travels here in the 8th District in this area, I walked into a bar. It sounds like a joke. It's not a joke. I walked into a bar. What happens when a priest, a cop, and a candidate walk into a bar? It happened in Wadena. And we talked about the need for, number one, beds in treatment. Right now, this is how we're treating people who are struggling with opioid addiction. They're either going to the emergency room or they're going to jail. That is wrong. We have to come together as a community, find the money to create beds and provide that treatment and get to the source of why people are being addicted and why they're turning to drugs in the first place. Thank you.
Kirsten?
So I don't know if I've already mentioned to this audience tonight, but I work 2 jobs. And one of the jobs I work is for the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership. And one of the things we work on is clinical linkages, access to health care. The opioid crisis is like any other addiction. It's just gotten out of control. And frankly, the pharmaceutical companies that produced these medications knew what they were doing. They had the research. They knew what was going on. They need to be held accountable. We held accountable to big tobacco. We can hold accountable big pharma. We're not doing it. No one's talking about it. No one's talking about charging them billions of dollars to help clean up this mess. We have to do more than just talk or charge $1 a pill. We need to treat the whole person that is addicted. It is generational. It is not just young people using, it's adults, it's grandparents. We have people in our region that don't have a place to live, that have lost everything and keep going. I would argue we need to have chronic pain centers, and they need to be located all over America. We need to have community interventions. We need to have methadone centers, and we need to federally pass a medical cannabis law so that veterans who suffer from chronic pain can get treated. Right now, if they go and they have a urine test, even if they're given a medical marijuana prescription in the state of Minnesota and they don't pass, they don't get treated. We are all responsible. These are not, it's not rocket science. We all know what it's like. We've all had someone in our family struggle with addiction. It might not be opioids, but we have good models in this country and other countries, and guess what? Other countries don't have this problem. So we need to figure out the root causes too, not just the treatment. People will go back out. We can figure it out.
Soren, would you like to rebut any of the responses?
Well, just really quickly, my own experience was being injured at work. I was working to get off of Social Security disability, and so I was lucky to have access to Medicare, right? And it took a long, hard fight with workers' comp. It's a broken system. They beat you down. They bury you in paperwork. I went a year without, not only a year without sleep, but I went a year without income. And so a lot of people get hooked on these drugs in really hellish economic situations where they're faced with losing their housing, where they can't return to work, where there's not really support for them to return to work. And honestly, right now, finding the drugs that actually work, I love being able to walk so much that I'm just going to keep knocking doors even if my campaign doesn't have any money, because it feels good to be able to do something that's meaningful again. So that's my thought on it. I had a cousin who died, probably suicide, but with opioids, and he was in a maintenance program for a long time. So maintenance doesn't work great with methadone. We need new drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies are holding up drug discovery.
The next question goes to Jason. The 8th District is at odds regarding jobs versus threats to clean water posed by the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline replacement and proposed precious metals mining. What is your plan for expanding jobs while still protecting the environment?
So Minnesotans, in my mind, have always been stewards of the environment, and I believe now more than ever it's our responsibility as Minnesotans to make sure that we leave the state better than we found it. We need to use our water carefully and responsibly so that we can pass it along to the next generation. And in the 8th Congressional District here, it's why in my Northern New Deal platform, we are proposing a natural resource-based tax, similar to what we do up on the Iron Range with the IRRB. And we could take a little bit of the profit from these companies and make sure that it's going back to our communities for economic development, for our schools, and other needs. With hard work and the investment, we can have a thriving natural resource-based economy while being good stewards still and leaving the state better than we found it. That's what I intend on doing when we get to Washington, is making a program like that a reality for this district so that we can continue to thrive moving forward into the next generation.
Joe, your response?
This is an issue that's obviously been at the center of a lot of the debate between us on stage here. And, I think that what we have to recognize as we are engaged in this Democratic primary is that there's a blue wing and a green wing to our party. And I come to the belief that we can't win this seat, and I think largely we can't win a lot of elections across rural places without having both of them at the table. So I think that requires a lot of listening. I think it requires a lot of uncomfortable conversations. And when it comes to some of the projects that are being discussed in northern Minnesota, I think it requires that we invest in the process and we make sure that we can hold the EPA accountable, the first step of which is to take back this seat and to be in the majority in Congress so that we can have investigations where necessary into the dealings of the EPA. I think that if we saw what's happening out there right now under former Administrator Scott Pruitt, we'd all be shocked. When it comes to these projects, I think that we need to make sure that they're evaluated in accordance with high standards, that those standards are not diluted in favor of these projects, and that we hold companies accountable if they're approved to building them exactly as they've laid out in the plans, and that we make sure that there's a financial assurance level that's bankruptcy proofed and cannot be taken away to ensure the proper closure of those mines. But the root issue here really is that there's a changing economy going on and is creating a lot of anxiety across our society. And so when we see the 10,000 less miners that it used to take to produce 40 million tons, we understand why these communities are so struggled. What I think that we need to do is make sure that we make investments in education and in our infrastructure to put people back to work. And if we do that and we allow people to maneuver in this economy and not be encumbered by their placement, then we're going to see a lot more, a lot better opportunity for everybody.
Michelle.
I'm not going to pussyfoot around this question. Number one, copper nickel sulfide mining has never been done in a water-rich environment. The push is on to make that mining come to northern Minnesota and near the Boundary Waters canoe area. There are people who say we can solve the problem, but why are we even thinking about creating a new problem when there are multiple problems we need to solve right now? When we pollute, and this water and this mining, when they destroy the water and the quality of water, there's no going back. Again, it's never been done anywhere in this world. There is no process that's going to be able to clean this mess up on such a large scale. So number one, the shortage of jobs. People are always saying we need jobs. Well, I've been driving around in my 14-year-old car throughout this district, and I'm seeing a heck of a lot of now hiring signs, workers wanted. And these aren't your little minimum wage jobs. These are good paying jobs. And International Falls are looking for truck drivers, $60,000 a year plus benefits. Down here, I was at a printing shop today. They're looking for people to train to become printers, something that they will be able to, skills that can be used for a long, long time. We have to start flipping the switch on what we're telling our young people, saying, giving them permission to go into our trades and voc-techs to learn these noble jobs that are going begging right now. I think I'm out of time, but we'll come back.
Kirsten.
Thank you. Here's what I say. We have a lack of workers in our region. So I have Anderson Windows, for instance, that is not running their overnight line because they can't get workers. I know we talk a lot about our district, which, by the way, encompasses Wyoming, Minnesota. I just want to be clear. Someone thought I meant the state of Wyoming when I said that's where our southern border was. And then all the way up to International Falls. We have a big district. And what we need to do is to commit to this. First of all, we need to strengthen the EPA. Is Congress, any of us in Congress up here, the EPA is where we can make sure that policy at the federal level is strengthened and followed. As far as the state issue goes, it's going through the processes right now. Some of them are in the courts. We have to let the process go through. What I will say is I disagreed with the land swap, and here is why. I mentioned earlier that less than 5% of bills are in open session. That's what I mean. Nothing should just be, hundreds of bills should just not be put on one bill. It should be open where we have discussion and debate and we talk about it. Environmental studies are great. I want to see health impact studies. I want to know what the health of our communities is going to be like. I want to know that they're going to pay for it if they take something for us. And I want us to remember that our district has many counties in it. And when I make a decision as your congresswoman, I will make a decision that's best for our district. So what I say is we need to be progressive and revitalize our district, all of our district, into a place for the next generation of workers. And we can do it by a federal infrastructure program, a green program that's fully funded. That is good jobs. It helps our cities that, by the way, cannot afford the infrastructure costs. So our infrastructure is crumbling. And that includes agriculture, too, within that. So let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put it up so we have roads, bridges, rail, airports, ports, agriculture, and our grids. Let's put our money where our mouth is.
Soren.
I believe I'm the only candidate up here who participated in public comments on the expansion of the Enbridge system. I made public comments on the secretary or the Department of State's cross-border permits for Line 67 and some of the comments that I made, because we understood that the Trump administration was not going to take any argument about climate change seriously, or any of the concerns of Native folks within the United States for their brethren across that imaginary border to the north in the extraction zones as a valid argument. So I encourage you to look for my arguments and to note the absence of other folks here on this panel and their lack of participation in that. As a brazen, unabashed environmentalist, I think that it should be easy to point out that there are tens of thousands of jobs being created in renewables today in Minnesota, right? That we have not put our money where our mouth is when it comes to investing in renewable energy. In our towns, in Bemidji and Hibbing or these other range towns, we invest multiples of what we put into that solar plant in Mountain Iron. We put that into hockey arenas, So we do need to stop tippy-toeing around or what have you with our investment in creating a climate that we can survive in by making a just transition to something other than fossil fuels immediately. And I oppose.
Thank you.
Polymet.
Jason, do you have a rebuttal for any of the responses?
I just want to say I support mining because I support our miners. For the last 100 years, our region has successfully met the challenges of mining safely and sustainably in taconite. And if we work hard and continue to invest in new technologies and research, we can meet that challenge. Virginia, the city where I live, where my family grew up, we get our water from a reclaimed mine pit. And it's a daily reminder and testament to all the hard work of previous generations did to preserve our environment. We have the tools for progress right here in this district. The NRI in Hermantown is working on a bacteria that eats sulfate, and the byproduct is a fertilizer that you can sell to a farmer. These are real solutions that we have the capability of investing in now, and with the hard work and investment that we're going to do, we can again have that thriving natural resource-based economy and be good stewards, making sure that we're leaving Minnesota a little better than we found it for our kids and grandkids.
Thank you. The next question goes to Joe, I believe. And a recent New York Times article this month said that the total student loan debt is now at $1.4 trillion. It is cited as one of the reasons for a decline in home ownership and even a declining birth rate. What would you do to reduce the current student loan debt and prevent the same thing from happening in the future?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do to reduce the student loan debt in this country is to stop treating our post-secondary students as a profit center. And so what we have in this country is a system whereby we borrow money as a nation, and then we allow middlemen to access it at very low rates, and then we allow them to charge students higher rates. Rarely does any other country do that. We can get rid of that system. That's one direct, very quick thing we can do. Now, I'm a proponent of free community and technical colleges. I believe that those institutions are nimble, they're responsive to local economies. For example, right here where we're at Central Lakes College, they've got a 4-year nursing program because they partnered with St. Scholastica in Duluth to address a nursing shortage here in the Brainerd Lakes area. I really believe in these institutions, and I believe actually that we could expand that model out to 4-year public schools too, especially if we use the 2-year schools as a feeder program. I think that's a really good way to go about making sure students have access to post-secondary education, that they can get engaged in programs that'll put them to work in their communities, and that they have an opportunity to understand what it's like to be a student as they matriculate through the process. That's really important. I think that that's pretty clear and straightforward. What we should understand is that student debt rivals home mortgage debt here in this country, and that's something that's unsustainable for the future. I just want to backtrack to the last question too, and it gets to a really important issue here which we have on the issue of the blue wing versus the green wing of this party. I don't think that we can win without both sides of it. And I think that the future we have here is that we need to invest in renewable energy jobs. We need to fight climate change. And those technologies, wind turbines, solar cells, they take copper, nickel, cobalt, palladium. And so we have a real quandary here in how we access those minerals sustainably and responsibly in the 21st century. And so I think that it's sometimes uncomfortable to have to wrestle with these things. But I was told an old proverb, which is that you can, if you want to travel fast, travel alone. If you want to travel far, travel together. So we need to work together to figure out these problems. It's easy to score points on these issues, but I think that the solution is much more complex than that.
Michelle.
Right now, we have a generation frozen in time. These young people are struggling to either choose between buying a home, getting married, having children, or paying those heavy-duty student loans. I believe in free tuition to our VOTEX and trades and public colleges and our public universities, and I would also like to see programs that will offer a chance for them to refinance at a lower interest rate or forgiveness and discharge of the current student loans. And I want to go back to the taconite, iron ore, and sulfide mining question. Number one, I support unions. I support taconite and iron ore mining, and I will do everything in my power to help shore up that industry. But again, when we talk about copper, nickel, sulfide mining, the proposals they want to do near the Boundary Waters Canoe area and within the Lake Superior watershed, that is bad science. We're not quite there, and I'm not saying never. Someday we will have the technology where we can go in and extract those minerals. We're not there yet. And one misstep could destroy the futures of many people. And I just want to say, number one, technology will come to protect our water or clean up the sludge from the toxic problems of copper, nickel, sulfide mining, but we're not there yet. We don't have little eating creatures that will suck out all of those poisons, and we don't have reverse osmosis that is large enough to tackle those millions and millions and millions of gallons of water. If we do, why aren't we testing it down in South America where they have polluted as a result of these foreign corporations that want to come in and build these mines? Why aren't they using this technology today and prove it to us that it can be done safely? They can clean up their toxic messes. Why aren't they up at Mount Poly, at the Mount Poly disaster in Canada, and showing us that this technology is already fruitful and can work? You know why? That technology is not available to us. And sure, there...
Thank you. Kirsten.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about mining. I'm going to talk about student debt because it affects almost everyone in my family, me, starting with me as a 45-year-old starting at the community college and moving my way to a master's degree. That was the only way I could go to college. I didn't have parents to give me college. I didn't have a plan through the military. And frankly, I think it's very interesting that in our country, our president, along with many, many businesses, including some who have come in and out of North Branch, declare bankruptcy. Did you know that student loans, you cannot declare bankruptcy? If you declare bankruptcy because you are living in poverty and cannot pay your bills, they do not discharge debt. That means that we have more than just one generation, because I know there's a lot of non-traditional students like me. We have millions of students and people that are paying their interest rate, and in 10 years, nothing's moving. That is worse than our mortgages. At least a mortgage is 15 or 30 years. This debt is following people after death. We need to change it. And we change it by, first of all, not making it a moneymaker. Who is making money off of student debt? When I graduated from high school, I'm going to age myself right now. I'm almost 55. It was $30 a unit at our local community college. It's not like that now. Semesters are thousands of dollars for the same education. So let's look at our education models. What we're doing in North Branch is we're looking at what the jobs in our region need, and then we're working with schools and community colleges to make sure that our students have the education they need to get good paying jobs. We can do better.
Soren.
We can save a lot of money right now by forgiving the student loans that we're never going to be able to collect, right? Right now our government is wasting money pursuing debts that folks who are disabled and can't jump through all the required hoops to get their loans forgiven formally will never be able to pay. So we need to look at that first, and then use some of those savings to repay more of these debts on behalf of people who are sacrificing, the health and safety and well-being of their family members in order to try to rebuild their credit, trying to make impossible payments. And we've got mechanisms that will pay for free college tuition in the future. And one of the big ones is the Robin Hood tax that the National Nurses Union and Bernie Sanders have dropped as bills that have passed CBO tests. The money's there if we choose. Going back to Joe and the mining issue, he regularly has this slick speech saying that if we want to make a just transition to renewable energy, we need to have copper nickel mining in Minnesota. There is no evidence that renewable energy in Minnesota is constrained in any fashion by a lack of copper. So, we are seeing a lack of manufactured solar panels. Today at the MFU program that I was at, I met a family that was building out a 1 megawatt private solar panel array to chill their potatoes for storage before market. And they're having trouble sourcing where their panels are coming from. They would prefer Minnesota-made. We had a great subsidy program for Minnesota-made solar panels, and we were just tippy-toeing around with that. And we need to really put our desire to survive in the future into really investing in a renewable and just economy.
Jason, your response?
Well, thank you. A quick couple of responses to those. We're not doing the testing in South America because we're leaders here in Minnesota in doing it the right way, and in this country in putting the environmental standards and regulations in place that we need for our kids to have a good environment after we're gone. So we're doing the testing on those sulfate in Babbitt and Virginia, and I'm darn proud of that because we're pushing forward in research where other people aren't doing it anywhere else. I think when we talk about the Minnesota-made solar is a bill that I passed with my colleague Carly Moline in the legislature in my first term. It was one of the nation's largest solar re-incentives in the country, one of the largest in the country. Now let me get to debt relief. Students that have graduated are burdened with so much that they just really need relief now. My wife had over $100,000 in student loans. The average person, now she was an Iowa girl who came to Minnesota and went to school. The average person has about $37,000 and some change in student loan debt that they'll be paying off over 20 years. The government should be helping us, not profiting from us. It makes around, I believe, $70 billion a year off the interest. I support cutting our interest rates and making sure that in government-held loans, we allow refinancing at lower interest rates, and that if people can prove with privately held loans that it was spent on the college and different things that you need to be in college, living, books, that they should also be allowed to refi at low government interest rates. And we've got to be careful of one thing that Soren mentioned. We can't just forgive a loan outright for like $30,000 because there's a tax burden that comes with that. And you don't want to be on the wrong side of the IRS.
Thank you. And Joe, would you like to rebut any of the responses?
Only in as much as that it may have been strategically wise to bring up that old question in this time period here. To the point earlier, I don't find myself unequivocally in favor or opposed to any mining projects. I think that what we have to do is wrestle with how we figure out these problems going forward. And all I'm saying is that it's not acceptable to me to externalize the consequences of my consumption. There was a report a few months ago that said that 20% of the world's cobalt comes from mines that employ children. That's in your Apple Watch, that's in your Apple phone. Apple has admitted as much, and so we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to hold high standards. And if a project can't be done safely, then it shouldn't be done. That's the bottom line. but we can't simply say it's never been done safely and that therefore we can't do it, right? We have to have the capacity to take these difficult problems head on and figure out a way using the best science we can to either evaluate whether we can or cannot do them. And if we can't do them safely, then we shouldn't do them at all.
Michelle, your question. A recent Ipsos poll revealed that almost half of Americans oppose the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, while a majority of Americans, 57%, would place limits on the amount of money super PACs can raise and spend. Do you support a constitutional amendment to overrule Citizens United, or do you have an alternative path to campaign finance reform?
I definitely believe Citizens United should be overturned. Corporations are not people. Money is not speech. And as a first-time candidate, I am seeing firsthand what all candidates and what all politicians are being asked to do in order to represent you and serve you, whether it's at the state level or in Washington, D.C. When I first announced that I was going to be a candidate, I had all kinds of slick people coming around and telling me I'm going to have to raise $500,000 or $1 million to just get to this primary election. And then they also said you're going to have to be on the phone 30 to 40 hours a week calling complete strangers to get the money needed for slick television ads and to get your message out to make sure that you could be the one to win. I chose not to do that. People say they want money out of politics. That is what we are doing. Most of our donations are $5, $10, and $15 donations within the 8th district. When we get a $100 donation, it is like Christmas. But that, if money truly is speech, the people of the 8th district who really want to change what's happening in Washington, they are doing it with their coffee money, maybe a tank of gas. They're doing it. So, number one, I will not take PAC money. I will not take corporate PAC money. I have made a pledge not to take fossil fuel money or the Koch brothers or the NRA. That is not the way politics should be run, where the man who has the gold makes the rules, the golden rule of politics. That is wrong, and we're doing it every day during this campaign. My campaign chair and manager, they all agree. We're doing this $1 at a time, one vote at a time, and getting out to rural areas throughout this district and listening to people and not sitting in those little booths or in the coffee shops dialing for dollars. That is wrong. Citizens United has to go. We have to get the money out of politics. I truly believe that can be done. I guess we'll find out on August 14th. Thank you.
Kirsten, your response?
Overturn Citizens United. But more importantly, let's talk about a couple of things. So there are 400 plus Congress people in our U.S. federal Congress. 19% are women. 19%. Yet women and men make up almost 50-50 in our state and nationwide. We have a problem. And here's the problem. Publicly funded election, 6-month election cycle. There you go. No private money, tiny donations. Let's just make a fair playing field.
I support overturning Citizens United, and that is the main reason that I've supported Rick Nolan. He was one of the first to drop a bill to trigger a constitutional convention where Citizens United would be revisited and overturned. Money has a very corrosive effect on our politics. I was recently excluded from a debate because I'm poor, right? The other candidates that were allowed to debate had raised more money for their campaigns, mostly by donating to their own campaigns, right? I mean, that's insane, right? I was excluded for the NPR debate because I hadn't met an arbitrary threshold. I mean, it violates FCC law, right? It violates First Amendment guarantees and federal election law and everything. And I'll get my equal time on NPR. But the fact is that I've been in this race since the 5th of June. And, per day, knocking doors, raising a couple bucks at a time. I've managed to print literature to knock nearly 10,000 doors at this point. I've only been able to donate a couple $100s to my own campaign. And I was excluded because I don't have the ability to donate $16,000 to my own campaign. And I don't know billionaires in Edina well enough to have them open up their homes and throw a fundraiser for me underneath crystal chandeliers. So,
Jason, your response?
Yes, we need to overturn Citizens United, and we need to pass laws that make it crystal clear that corporations aren't people. So if we don't get a constitutional convention, that we get a change in the way our Supreme Court interprets those laws, and we can reverse it that way. We also need to make sure that we're publicly financing our campaigns. And that means money out of politics, period. I don't think we should have small donations or anything. I think you should get a set amount, and we should be able to get up here and debate on the issues, and you should be able to select the candidate that you feel best represents you on those issues. One way we can overturn Citizens United, though, or pass some of these laws, is by expanding people's right to vote in this country. We need to make sure we have a great role model here in Minnesota. Same-day voter registration. Early absentee, no excuse voting. Those were all initiatives we worked on over, or some of the initiatives we've worked on over the last 6 years at the Minnesota legislature. It is a great role model that we could take out to Washington and make sure some people in some of those other states who don't have the access to get to the polls get the opportunity to do it from a mail-in ballot, no excuse, or investing in making sure that in disenfranchised communities, wherever they are, that they have a polling location nearby. It is ridiculous that we talk about being a democracy, but we don't give people access to vote, and I will fight every day in Washington to make sure that everyone, whether they're with me or against me, has the right to get out and exercise their biggest equalizer, which is being the same as a millionaire or someone who's worried about how they're going to pay their next mortgage bill or credit card. They're all the same in the voting booth.
Thank you. Joe.
In fairness to everybody at the table here, I've looked through some of the reports, and I'm not sure who's donated any money to their own campaigns necessarily, but want to just put out there that I think that money in politics is the most corrosive thing that we're facing. I think it corrupts our political system, and as an example of it, it's not just a quid pro quo system, but instead if you have to raise money to run a campaign, the most expensive campaign perhaps in the country, which is right here in the 8th Congressional District, and if you're a smart person and you want to save time so you can go out there and talk to voters, which is also an important aspect of this job, then maybe you might find yourself calling some people with a lot of money. So the problem with calling people with a lot of money isn't that they're necessarily going to ask you to do something for that money. It's that pretty soon if you spend all day on the phone talking to people who can donate $2,000 or $5,000 to you, you start thinking the rest of the world thinks like people who can donate $2,000 or $5,000 to you. We all know that's not the case. How many people in here could give me $5,000? No, seriously, raise your hand. We're taking notes up here. So the issue that we have is that Citizens United was a Supreme Court case that was passed, I think, in 2008 or 2009. And the problem we have is that without changing the balance of the Supreme Court, which, whoops, is gone now, we aren't going to be able to address that without a constitutional amendment. And so I think the role of the legislator seeking to represent the people here in the 8th District is to go out there and fight for these reforms. I believe in publicly financed elections. I believe in limiting the amount of time that these elections take place in. I believe in preventing legislators from raising money while they're in the Congress so that we don't have the appearance of any corruption. And I think that we need to do these things right now to take back our democracy. And that's why I'm proud to have the support of End Citizens United, which is the group in Washington, D.C. leading the fight to remove the corrupting influence of secret money in our political system. Look for the announcement tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to rebut any of the responses?
I will just say that I will not be having fundraising parties under chandeliers. Thank you. We're doing pop-up events where we're handing out our lawn signs, whether it's in a parking lot. But these are the things of it's a new politic. And it's about people getting involved. And as far as making sure that the citizenry can get out and vote, I think that's part of the issue that this party, the DFL party, really needs to start coming to the table and getting people educated that, yes, number one, there is a primary election on August 14th. I'm not taking the party to task, but I'll tell you, when I go out and knock on doors, people say, oh, well, I live in Hermantown. Can I vote for you in the 8th district? Yes. People don't understand where the district is, what day can they cast their ballot, how do you register to vote? Sure, the Secretary of State is putting it out on their website, but 3/4 of the people in the Northland don't have access to broadband and can't get online to find out where they are voting. So it's up to each and every one of us in this room to tell our friends and neighbors and to help educate so we have an educated electorate, at least to tell them where they can vote, there is early voting, and how to register for that vote. And that's each one of our responsibilities as members of the DFL party.
Thank you. The next question goes to Kirsten. According to the Peterson-Kaiser Health Systems Tracker, the United States spends nearly twice as much per capita on healthcare as other developed countries, and yet life expectancy in the United States has not kept up with the rest of the industrialized world. 1 in 10 adults reported that they delayed or did not get care because of cost. What is your plan to address the increasing healthcare costs and the decreasing results in access?
As I said earlier, I work on population health. On population health, but I do have a mom voice, so I'm sure most of you could hear me. What we have to do is I often say to people, because I would love to see single-payer health care tomorrow in this country. We had a Democratic president, Senate, and House that did not pass single-payer health care. We have to move in steps forward to make sure it happens, because otherwise we're part of the problem. So what I say is we take the best parts of the ACA and strengthen them. We expand Medicare. We lower the age. We can start at 62, move to 60, and then maybe 58, and then create Medicare E, Medicare for everyone, so we have no one uninsured, no one going bankrupt, no one having to decide if they're going to go to the doctor or put food on the table or get their insulin or put food on the table or gas in their car. And I think that if we do that, if we can take those steps, we can get the bipartisan support to move us there. Medicare is our only single-payer model in the U.S. Let's expand it. Guess what? Medicare negotiates. They're really good at it. They negotiate for services. They negotiate for prescriptions. Let's expand it. And guess what? Let's hold our manufacturers accountable. Maybe we need to bring in some pharmaceuticals from outside, other countries that have lower prices. We always talk about competition until it's one of our big lobbying groups. Then they don't really want the competition.
Soren, your response?
Could I hear the question again?
Basically, what is your plan to address the increasing healthcare costs and the decreasing results and access?
Well, I've been an activist for Medicare for All and for House Bill 676 since 2009 or 2010. Additionally, in the state of Minnesota, there's been the Minnesota Health Plan. I believe that is essentially the plan that Representative Erin Murphy is championing right now. I would urge you all, when you're casting your votes for other candidates, that you consider a vote for those candidates that are actually supporting single payer within the state. So, vote for Erin Murphy. I don't think that we can tolerate too many stopgap measures to repair ACA. Healthcare is a human right. We need to get there. We have a couple of other single-payer type models. We've got kind of militarized healthcare for Native American folks through the Indian Health Services. We've got VA. I don't propose tearing those down, but I do propose that we have a system where folks aren't stuck in those silos, that they have the freedom and flexibility to move and get care in civilian hospitals as well. It's the only way forward. Medicare for all at the national level, the Minnesota Health Plan, and Erin Murphy at the state level. Thank you.
Jason.
I think you're going to hear a lot of us say healthcare is a human right, because it is on an international level. Unfortunately, in America, we don't treat it like that. It seems to be becoming a privilege for the wealthy few that can afford it, and middle-class families aren't in that position anymore. We need to make sure that we have a Medicare for all system that's expanded, that covers your medical, your dental, your vision, and your reproductive care, all under one umbrella. We can expand that and make sure that people are getting the access they need and the simplicity they need to seek the care that they need. We have people coming right out of these communities here, and in Walker, I was at a meeting where a woman told me she got a letter one day from her insurance company saying that the prescription coverage she needed was denied. No option for appeal and no explanation. And that's just wrong. In Minnesota, we do look out for each other, and our government should be looking out for you as well. Over a third of our administrative dollars are spent trying to figure out how to deny your claims, or a third of your dollars, I should say, that go into your healthcare coverage go to administration, which then go to try to deny your claims, which is wrong. We need to improve our healthcare system and put people over profits and pass a Medicare for all system that all Americans get access to, no matter your age, gender, race, or income, and I'm not going to stop fighting till we get there.
Joe.
Well, I'm a proponent of a Medicare for all system in this country. I think that's the vision of where we need to go, and I think that it speaks to the problem. And the problem with healthcare in this country is that, as Mike mentioned, my statistics are a little bit different, but that we pay more per person in this country than any other nation in the world. The next closest nation is Switzerland, which is 31% less than we pay per capita here, according to the statistics that I've seen. 18% of our GDP, our gross domestic product, is tied up in the healthcare industry. The next highest nation, according to the statistics I've seen, is Germany at 12%. So it gives you a sense that here we're paying a lot more and we're not necessarily getting better benefits for it. An example of why I think Medicare for all is a good plan is that Medicare operates somewhere around a 5% overhead when private insurance companies operate at 13 to 18% overhead. So what are they charging you so much for that Medicare isn't? And I think that's the real question that we have to ask health insurance companies right now. If they're going to continue to exist at all, what value are they providing for the money that they're taking? And I'm skeptical that they'll have a tough time rationalizing as much as they're taking. However, if we can't get all the way to Medicare for all or a single-payer system like most other countries have, I think that the first thing that we need to look to then is a public option, an option that covers the bare spots in the market. One of the problems with the Affordable Care Act is that if you live in certain places in this country, there aren't many insurance carriers willing to take you. And so then what do you do in the absence of a public option? A public option gives somebody a place to go when they have no other more efficient means. I think that's an important first step. That's something that we can do, and it's something that I will fight for in the absence of Medicare for all out there. But I think that we need to keep the dream alive. Single-payer health care is the way to go for this country.
Michelle.
Number one reason for bankruptcy in this country is a medical crisis. That is absolutely wrong. Healthcare is indeed a human right. And if I am elected as your first Congresswoman to represent Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, one of the first things I will do is to sign on to the Medicare for All bill. And as Kirsten mentioned, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to be able to flip a switch and everybody is going to have health care. It's a process. It's going to take time. When you're considering it's 17% of the gross national product, that equals many jobs, businesses that are already working as a part of this healthcare system or the lack of a healthcare system we have now. It's going to take time, but we need to start today to build that process. And I think by sending good Democrats to Washington and building that blue wall in the U.S. House, we can come together, get those bills out of committee, and actually start working on the process. So again, single payer, Medicare for all, it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to start today because I don't want to be here 10 years from now saying we need to start today. Because that's what happened when Hillary Clinton tried to do something when her husband was president. It was stopped. President Obama, Obamacare, it was a good program, but the Republicans allowed it to die on the vine and did everything possible to kill it. We need a good group of Democrats who believe strongly that healthcare is a human right and that we work toward that and start flipping that switch. And I want to say quickly, we also have to start looking at preventative health care. We don't teach exercises and physical education in our schools anymore. A lot of people don't, there's no home ec classes. People don't know anything about nutrition. They're hungry, they eat. And then we have the obesity epidemic, or we have health issues as a result of poor nutrition, the farm to table programs, food deserts. These are the things we can address. We need to start building healthy Americans from the ground up from the day they are born, and not arrest women who want to breastfeed their kids at this local swimming pool. And that's how we start. Common sense. Thank you.
Kirsten, would you like to rebut any of the responses?
Just quickly, the Medicare program that I spoke of is the everyone option, which means no one would be uninsured in the United States. And that's part of this white paper's excellent look into taking those steps to get us to single payer. I do agree with Michelle Lee. We are a death and dying model in the United States. And by the way, we have crappy birth rates for babies. Let's talk about that. And we're like 37th in lifespan in the United States of America. How about we move from the death and dying model? We have a $700 billion military complex budget. How about we take a little bit about that and do some prevention?
And our last question, with responses from others, the last question goes to Soren. According to the Washington Post, in the first half of 2018, there were 154 recorded mass shootings of 5 people or more. How would you modify current gun laws to make Americans safer?
As I stated before, one of the things that we need to do is repeal the Dickey Amendment, make it possible for the CDC to study and understand the complex crisis that is the gun violence epidemic in America. I would like to see instituted some rational checks on who's purchasing weapons that match the profiles of the worst mass shootings, or people who are acquiring weapons retail within our borders to support conflicts abroad. So I think if you buy a few thousand rounds of the most likely types of ammunition that have been used historically in these mass shootings, that a local sheriff follows up and asks you what your plan is to use that, right? That anyone who buys a mix of these stereotypical assault weapons all at once, or large numbers of high-capacity magazines, gets a follow-up from law enforcement. Just say, hey, what's your plan to use that, right? And I think most folks that have these weapons today would pass those tests, right? Like, I was in the service, I know this weapon, I have a romantic attachment to it, I use it at the range. I work in law enforcement. I've got family and friends who have that justification for having, the civilian equivalent of weapons that they used in war, and I trust that most of them would use those weapons responsibly. But we have had the problem of foreign agents buying our weapons and exporting them to conflicts like Kosovo. We saw people buying the 50 caliber sniping rifles and flying with them in commercial aircraft to employ them in foreign wars. So we do need global controls on small arms and ammunition, and that's one of the big things that the NRA is fighting, and that's one of the reasons why Russia has partnered with the NRA today to prevent peace activists in this country and activists around the world from putting real controls on this ugliest form of commerce.
Jason.
I've been a responsible gun owner and Second Amendment supporter as well my whole life. And when I was in high school, we lived up in Alaska, there was a school shooting, one of the first in the nation. We were at a student government conference, and our friends learned, it was in Bethel, our friends in Bethel learned of their fellow classmates, and I believe it was a assistant principal who were hurt or killed. The fact that it's happening 20 years later is disgraceful, that we're allowing people to be put in harm's way because we can't tackle the tough gun lobby groups out there. I think that one thing we could do right away that almost everyone in the country agrees with is to make sure that we have a universal background check system that allows, or puts a stop, I should say, not allows, to a domestic abuser, say, in Minnesota, traveling to Wisconsin, Florida, name your state, and then coming back to Minnesota with that weapon and harming a partner. A universal background check system would stop that from happening, and we need to keep guns out of the people's hands who can't use them responsibly and shouldn't have them. And I will make sure that we're making forward progress on that out in Washington.
Joe.
This is probably one of the few places where I wouldn't be news to a lot of people when I say that gun violence has impacted my life in a very significant way. Both suicide and homicide have existed in my family at a young age for me, and it's had an impact, obviously, on me as I've gotten older. And I think it speaks to the situation. You know, my mother was murdered at our home by a family member, and that's one aspect of gun crime, right? It's domestic, and there's a certain set of policy solutions I think that would be best aimed at that. There's another aspect of gun violence, which is suicide, and in fact 60% of the gun deaths in our country, and there's a little over 30,000, 60% of them are suicides, and that's a different set of policy solutions as well. That's waiting periods, that's access to mental health, that's ensuring that our communities are healthy, strong counselors in schools. I'm a lifelong hunter. I've been, around guns my whole life, and for a long time I bought the argument that a semi-automatic deer rifle, a 30-06 Winchester, functions the same as an AR-15. And in a very limited sense, it's very true, right? That those two guns, if you pull the trigger one time, will shoot one bullet. But what we saw and what changed my opinion on gun laws in terms of rifles is the Las Vegas massacre, where one deranged man went and bought several assault-style weapons, and with little modification, bump stocks, and high-capacity magazines, he shot 450 people in a matter of 5 minutes. And I don't believe that we can have that happening in our country. And so when it comes to those types of rifles, I support raising the age of purchase to 21. I support banning bump stocks and high-capacity magazines, and I think that we need to pass what should be common sense, which are universal background checks across the board. I think if we take those steps initially and we still have some of these problems, then we can come back and look at what potential solutions will address them, but that's where I'd go from now.
Michelle.
I'm a gun owner. I have a permit to carry. I go to the gun range with my husband maybe 4 or 5 times a year. We enjoy it. I won't brag about the size of my gun, what kind of gun I have. We're very responsible gun owners, and we make sure that it does not fall into the wrong hands. That said, I believe that we should look at common sense gun laws so we will never see carnage again at the scope and the size that we've seen in the past several years in our public places. I believe that we should ban bump stocks, which I think they're on their way out, high-capacity magazines, noise suppressors, and I believe military assault-style weapons should only be in the hands of those who are sworn to protect us and not in the hands of those who choose to harm us. I believe in background checks. I believe in universal registration. I believe in red flag laws where families, where there are people who are struggling with mental illness or who choose to harm either themselves or their families, where the families can call police and police can come and confiscate those guns, and there's a process to get those guns back after a cooling down period. Those are the red flag laws. I believe in the Second Amendment. And I'm trying to remember the last amendment that was ever overturned in America, and I think that had to do with prohibition, and America really loved its beer. So, they really love their guns too. Right now there are 300 million guns in private hands in America. It's going to take one heck of an army to come to your home and take your gun. We don't have enough judges. We don't have enough search warrants. So the Second Amendment isn't going nowhere. Your guns are safe if you are a law-abiding citizen. But we have to tackle the issue of gun violence, whether it's through research and study and just common sense gun safety regulation.
Kirsten.
Recently in our government, they said that the CDC could study gun violence, but they didn't fund it. Now we study death by automobile, cancer, death by suicide, We need, sometimes how you move people is with statistics and facts. I guess it's not enough that we've been talking about this issue since 1991. Not enough. No one's coming to take your guns. And we need to have some responsibility. I approve of everything people up here have suggested, but I have a question because I always try to figure things out. Like I always wondered how tobacco got away with it. And then when they had to pay and states got it, now we're doing vaping. So my question is this. If I serve alcohol to some kids at my house or a bar and they go out and kill someone, there's some liability there. Right now, we have zero liability for all of the deaths. It's not costing anyone anything except for the lives of people's family members that they love. So while no one's coming to take away your guns, if we do not take measures to do it, then the NRA and the gun manufacturers should hold some liability because we cannot sustain the deaths that are going on, the medical bills that are going on, the ER visits with doctors that say they have not seen anything like what high-capacity magazines do. There is no saving people from it. Their insides are mush. With a pistol, guess what? Or a knife, there's a good chance we might make it. And frankly, as a mayor, I am appalled that anyone would come and want to make our schools like prisons, and teach elementary school kids to throw rocks at the perpetrators. I think we can do better, America.
Soren, do you have any rebuttals to the responses? No. In that case, then that concludes our program. Thank you to the candidates and to our sponsors, and thank you, audience, for your patience. Yeah. Good luck. Thank you. Did you just get here for the next few weeks?
So I want you to know I had no part of that being elected.
Not happy with the response. I think that he's the message that I got from him is about trying to not file a complaint.
I know she's a teacher.